Snow fell like ash over the abandoned railway station. Each flake spun in the pale light of a dying lantern, landing softly on the warped boards of the platform where Eliza Mayfield sat, her breath rising in trembling clouds. She had been there for hours, maybe longer. Time had blurred since the train left, since the man who had promised to love her forever climbed aboard and never looked back. Her gloved hands rested on her belly, curved and heavy beneath her coat. 6 months along now. She was 26, beautiful once, though beauty did little for a woman carrying another man's shame. The hem of her dress was soaked through, her boots crusted with frost. Around her, the station was nearly silent, only the creak of wood and the lonely moan of wind through iron rails. A few townsfolk lingered near the general store across the tracks, pretending not to stare. Their whispers carried through the cold air like needles. "She's the one he left," someone murmured. "Too big for him. Too bold." Another voice, female, sharp as glass, replied. "Serves her right, flaunting herself like that." Eliza pretended not to hear. She had grown used to the sound of judgment, low voices, glances that turned her body into rumor. Still, it stung. She shifted slightly on the bench, clutching her shawl tighter, as though she could hide the rounded life within her. The storm grew heavier. The snow came sideways now, hissing across the tracks, burying the footprints of everyone who had passed through that morning. The last train was gone until dawn. No more travelers, no warm cars or tickets to anywhere. Just her. She looked toward the west, where the tracks disappeared into gray. "You'll come back," she whispered, though her voice shook with disbelief. He had said he loved her, once, under the shade of a sycamore, when her hair still smelled of summer, and her waist fit his arms like a promise. But love, she had learned, was easier when a woman was small enough to be carried and silent enough to be owned. The door to the telegraph office opened with a creak. Sheriff Dugan stepped out, pulling his collar up against the wind. His badge caught the light, flashing dull gold. "Station's closed, miss," he said, glancing at her belly before spitting into the snow. "Ain't proper for you to stay here." "I've nowhere else to go," she replied softly. He shrugged. "Then you'd best pray the Lord keeps you warm. Ain't my problem." He walked away, boots crunching, the sound fading into the storm. Eliza's eyes burned. Not from the cold, but from the weight of it all, the long silence that followed her everywhere, the ache of being seen only as disgrace. She rose slowly, gathering her bundle. A small satchel with her Bible, a baby blanket, and the last of her money. The station lantern flickered, throwing her shadow long and trembling against the wall. She began to walk. Each step was an effort, her body heavy, the snow deep. She followed the tracks toward town, the distant lights of the saloon faint through the curtain of white. Horses neighed somewhere far off. The smell of coal smoke drifted by. The town looked almost kind from afar, lamplight glowing in windows, soft music from the saloon, but as she neared its warmth turned cruel. Laughter spilled out from behind frosted glass. A woman's voice sang a tune about love and whiskey. Eliza paused, staring at the window where silhouettes danced. Once, she had dreamed of a night like that, of music, of someone holding her without shame. She walked on. At the corner stood the inn. A sign swung overhead, Wilkes Boarding House. She hesitated, then knocked. The door opened a crack, and Mrs. Wilkes peered out. Plump, middle-aged, her hair tied in a severe knot. "Oh," she said flatly, "it's you." Eliza tried to smile. "Just for tonight, ma'am. I can pay." Mrs. Wilkes's eyes drifted downward. "We don't keep unmarried ladies in that condition." "I'll sleep by the stove. Please." The woman shook her head. "Find the church. The pastor takes pity cases." The door shut. The bolt slid home. Eliza stood for a moment, staring at the grain of the door, before turning away. Her shoulders trembled. She made her way down the empty street, the snow thick now, the wind cutting through her clothes. When she reached the outskirts, where fences replaced houses and the land opened wide, she stopped beside a freight wagon half buried in snow. Crawling beneath it, she huddled against the wheel, pulling her shawl around her like armor. Her hands ached from the cold. She pressed them to her belly, whispering, "You just stay strong in there." The baby kicked faintly, a soft reminder of life inside her own fading strength. She closed her eyes. The narrator, old and tender, seemed to breathe with her. I remember that winter, the voice says. The year the snow never stopped, and the town forgot Mercy. She was just another lost soul to them, another woman they called foolish for loving too hard. Eliza dreamed of warmth. Of the man she'd trusted, the way his smile had once made her feel safe. She remembered the sound of the train whistle when he left, the promise that, "I'll come back when you've lost the weight." Shame crawled through her veins like ice. The wind howled through the wagon spokes. Hours passed. A dog barked somewhere distant, then silence again. The moon rose, a pale coin behind clouds. Her lips moved in prayer, though no sound came. Then, a noise. Hoofbeats. Slow at first, then stopping nearby. The air shifted, thick with presence. Eliza held her breath. A shadow loomed against the snow, tall and broad, a man dismounting. He moved with the calm surety of someone used to storms. His long hair hung wet around his face. His breath came in white puffs. Through the blur of snow, she saw he was bare-chested beneath a fur-lined coat, muscles moving beneath skin dusted with frost. He knelt, his hand brushing the snow aside to reveal her face. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "You'll freeze to death out here." She flinched. "Go away." He didn't. Instead, he took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it shocked her, rough for brushing her cheek. The scent of smoke and leather filled her senses. "You don't know me," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment. The firelight from his lantern caught his eyes, gray, tired, honest. "Don't need to," he said. "You're freezing." "I'll manage." "You won't." His tone was gentle but firm. "Come on. My cabin's up the ridge." Eliza hesitated. No man had touched her with kindness since her world fell apart. She wanted to trust him, but fear tangled her words. "Why would you help me?" He tilted his head slightly. Snow clung to his hair, melting against his skin. "Because you need it." Her breath caught. There was no pity in his voice, just quiet certainty. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like something broken. She nodded slowly, gripping his hand. He lifted her easily, one arm supporting her back, the other steadying her against his chest. The contact startled her, his warmth, the steadiness of his breath. She rested her head against him, too weak to resist. The snow swirled around them as he carried her to his horse. The animal snorted, impatient, stamping at the frost. He mounted, pulling her close. The world blurred, the storm, the town, the whispers, all fading into white. As they disappeared into the darkness, the old narrator's voice returned. "Some souls meet not in sunlight but in storms. And sometimes, mercy wears the face of a stranger, who doesn't ask your name before saving you." Eliza looked once over her shoulder. The railway station, half buried in snow, glowed faintly under the lantern. For the first time since morning, she felt the faint pulse of hope. The man whispered against the wind, his voice barely audible. "You're safe now." She didn't answer. But inside, beneath layers of fear and cold, something small and stubborn began to thaw. And as the last light of the town vanished behind them, she realized she hadn't even asked his name. Snow followed them into the mountains like a living thing, whispering through pine and over stone. The horse climbed slowly, its breath steaming against the night, hooves muffled in the white drift. Eliza clung to the stranger's coat, her fingers numb but her mind awake in the silence. The rhythm of his heartbeat was steady beneath her cheek, each thud both foreign and reassuring. Neither spoke. The world was soundless except for wind and the crunch of hooves. The man's arm remained firm around her, not possessive, but protective. Every time the horse stumbled, he steadied her. When the lantern flame flickered out, he didn't curse. He simply rode by the faint glimmer of snowlight, as though he trusted the darkness to guide him. After what felt like hours, he stopped before a small cabin built into the slope, half hidden by pines. Smoke rose from a crooked chimney. "We're here," he said quietly. His voice was deep, unhurried, a sound that didn't demand trust but somehow earned it. He dismounted first, then lifted her down. Her legs wobbled. He caught her before she fell. For a moment their eyes met, hers wide with exhaustion, his calm and unreadable. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, though she barely could. He led her inside. The cabin was simple. One room, a stone hearth, a wooden table, a bed draped in wool. The air smelled of cedar and smoke. Heat radiated from the fire, turning her shivers into tears. He hung his coat by the door, leaving his chest bare to the glow. Muscles tensed as he moved, his skin marked by the work of a life outdoors. Eliza turned away quickly, embarrassed by her own glance. He noticed but said nothing. He poured water from a kettle into a basin, placed it on the table, and nodded toward it. "Wash up. You'll catch your death if you stay wet." She hesitated. "You're kind, but I shouldn't be here." He ignored that, walking to the fire. "Name's Luke Carver," he said, almost to himself. "You're safe, Mississippi." "Eliza," she whispered. "Eliza Mayfield." "Eat, Eliza." He handed her a tin plate of beans and cornbread. "You look like you ain't touched food in a day." The first bite burned her tongue, but she didn't stop. He didn't watch her eat. He sat by the fire sharpening a knife, the steady rasp oddly peaceful. The sound filled the silence like a lullaby. When she finished, she murmured, "Thank you." He nodded once, eyes on the blade. "Storm will keep till morning. You can have the bed." She looked toward it, the only one. "I'll take the chair." "Not a chance," he said. "You sleep. I'll sit." She wanted to argue but couldn't. Her body sagged with fatigue. She slipped off her boots, laid her shawl over the blanket, and lowered herself onto the bed. The mattress smelled faintly of pine and smoke, clean but lived in. Luke took the chair by the fire, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire cracked softly, painting their shadows against the wall. Eliza closed her eyes, but the sound of his breathing held her awake. After a while she whispered, "Why did you help me?" He didn't look up. Didn't seem right, leaving someone to freeze. No one else would have stopped. He shrugged. "Guess that's their shame." The simplicity of his answer undid her. A tear slid down her cheek, hot against the cold that lingered in her bones. He saw it but said nothing, only added another log to the fire. The storm thickened outside, wind howling like something wild and lost. The cabin creaked under its weight. Eliza turned on her side, watching him through half-closed eyes. His face, lit by the flames, was carved in silence, hands scarred, jaw unshaven, eyes far away. He looked like a man who carried ghosts. "Do you live here alone?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Used to be two of us." "What happened?" He hesitated, then said simply, "Winter took her." Eliza's breath caught. The quiet that followed felt sacred. She wanted to say she was sorry, but words would have sounded small against the grief that lived in his tone. Instead, she whispered, "I know what it's like to lose." He met her gaze for the first time fully. "You loved him." Her throat tightened. "I thought I did." The fire popped between them, like punctuation on a truth too hard to name. Luke leaned back in the chair, eyes on the flames. "Folks forget love ain't always soft," he said. "Sometimes it leaves bruises you can't see." She nodded faintly, clutching the blanket. The wind rattled the window shutters, but inside, the warmth grew steady. She felt the baby move and laid her hand gently over her belly. For a moment, she could almost believe the world wasn't against her. Later, when the fire dimmed to embers, Luke stood and fetched another quilt. He draped it carefully over her. The gesture startled her awake. She blinked at him, lips parted to speak, but he only said, "Go on. Sleep." He went back to the chair, folding his arms across his chest. Eliza turned toward the wall, her heart aching with something unfamiliar. Safety, maybe. She tried to remember the last time someone had looked after her, without wanting anything in return. The memory didn't exist. Outside, dawn crept faintly through the storm. Light filtered through cracks in the boards, soft as breath. She slept at last, her face calm for the first time in weeks. Luke watched her until the sun rose higher, until he was sure she wouldn't wake from nightmares. Then he stepped outside. The snow was waist-deep, the horse half buried beside the fence. The world lay white and endless, silent except for the occasional caw of a crow. He breathed deep, the cold burning his lungs. He'd sworn after his wife's death never to let another soul depend on him. Yet here she was, a stranger, broken and pregnant, asleep in his bed while the world outside judged them both. He ran a hand through his wet hair and muttered, "Fool thing to do, Carver." But even as he said it, he felt the truth settle heavy and warm in his chest. When he went back inside, Eliza stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, soft with confusion. "You didn't leave," she murmured. "No," he said, hanging his coat by the fire again. "Storm's worse. Roads are gone." She sat up slowly, one hand braced on the mattress. "Then I'll go once it clears." Luke looked at her, steady and unblinking. "You won't make it far alone." "I've made it this far." "Barely." His tone wasn't cruel, just matter-of-fact. Silence fell again, but this time it felt different, charged, uncertain. She looked down, ashamed of her own weakness. He picked up the kettle, poured her tea, and placed it in her hands. Steam rose between them, fragrant and warm. "You'll stay," he said quietly, "until the snow stops." Her lips parted to argue, but the way he said it left no room. It wasn't a command but a vow, a promise that for now, she wasn't alone. Outside, the wind howled harder, blanketing the world in white. Inside, two strangers sat before the fire, their fates quietly beginning to braid together. And somewhere deep in Eliza's heart, a voice whispered what she dared not believe, that maybe the storm wasn't meant to trap her, but to save her. Morning came softly, pouring gold through the cracks in the cabins would like a quiet promise. The storm had calmed overnight, leaving behind a world sculpted in white. The trees bowed beneath snow's weight, and the air outside hung still, thick with the hush that follows hardship. Inside, the fire burned low but steady, and Eliza woke to the sound of chopping wood. Luke's axe rose and fell outside, the rhythm patient and sure. She lay for a moment, watching her breath bloom in the cold air, her hand resting on the curve of her belly. The ache in her back had eased, replaced by a slow, unfamiliar warmth, a safety she didn't yet trust. The blanket he'd given her still smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. When she finally stood, the floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet. She looked around the small room. The table, the chair where he'd slept, the kettle blackened by years of use. Everything bore the mark of a man who lived alone, but kept things mended. It was the kind of care born not from vanity, but from quiet necessity. She lit the stove and poured water from the pot he'd left ready. Her movements were hesitant, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace of this borrowed refuge. Through the small window she could see him, shirtless again despite the cold, his back gleaming with sweat, muscles coiling with every strike. The sound of the axe was both harsh and soothing, like a heartbeat echoing through the woods. When he came in, snow dusted his hair, and his breath clouded in the air. "You're up early," he said, wiping his brow. "I couldn't sleep much." She offered him a cup of hot water, unsure if he'd take it. He did, nodding a silent thanks before setting it on the table. His eyes lingered on the small fire she'd built. "You did that yourself?" She nodded. "Figured I should do something useful." He grunted, a sound that could have meant approval. Then, softer, "You don't have to earn your keep here." The words struck her more deeply than he likely intended. She'd spent months begging for corners to sleep in, for mercy wrapped in judgment. She wanted to answer but couldn't find language for the gratitude, an ache tangled in her chest. Instead, she began sweeping the cabin floor with a straw broom she'd found behind the stove. Luke didn't stop her this time. He sat by the fire, rubbing a whetstone along his knife, the faint scrape marking the minutes. When she finished, she stood in the doorway, watching the snow glare bright outside. "Storm's easing," he said. "Road'll open in a few days." She turned toward him. "And then?" "You'll head where you want." Her lips parted. "And if I don't know where that is?" He looked up, his eyes unreadable. "Then you stay till you figure it out." The silence that followed was thick with something unspoken. Not invitation, not yet comfort, but understanding. That afternoon, she found herself humming while hanging wet clothes by the fire. The melody was faint, from some forgotten lullaby. Luke paused mid-task, listening. "Haven't heard a song in this house for 2 winters," he murmured. Eliza blushed, embarrassed. "Sorry, Don't be." His tone was gentle. "It's good." Their days found a rhythm. Luke worked outdoors, chopping, hauling, tending to his horses, while she cooked or cleaned, slow but purposeful. Each night, they shared quiet meals at the small table. He'd tell her bits of his life. How the cabin had belonged to his father, how the land used to be full of elk before the railroad came. She listened, her silence neither empty nor shy, but respectful. Once she asked, "Do you ever get lonely out here?" He thought for a long time before answering. "You get used to your own voice echoing back. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it ain't." Her gaze drifted to the fire. "I used to fill every silence with talk. Thought if I kept speaking, I'd keep the bad thoughts out." He gave a small smile. "And did it work?" "No." She looked up at him, her expression open, vulnerable. "Turns out silence doesn't hurt when someone's in it with you." He said nothing, but the way his hands stilled on his cup told her he'd heard her deeper meaning. As the days passed, the snow melted from the eaves, dripping like clock ticks. Eliza's color returned, and so did a faint laughter she hadn't heard from herself in months. She began to move through the cabin with ease, her body adjusting to its space as if it were slowly becoming her own. One evening, she found him carving wood by the hearth. The shape looked like a cradle, half-formed and rough. She watched quietly, her hands twisting in her lap. "For the baby?" she asked at last. He nodded without looking up. "Don't have much practice with pretty things. But it'll hold." Her throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "I know." He kept carving. "Some things a man does because he can't stand the thought of doing nothing." She turned her face from him, hiding the tears that threatened to spill. The next morning, Sheriff Dugan rode up the mountain, the metallic jingle of his spurs breaking the peace. Luke met him outside. "Heard you've taken in a stray," the sheriff said with a smirk. Words spreading fast. Luke's jaw tensed. "You ride up here to gossip?" "I ride to warn. Town don't like talk of sin under Carver's roof." Luke stepped closer, his shadow towering over the man. "Ain't the town's business who I keep warm and fed." Dugan spat into the snow. "You're a fool, Luke. That woman's trouble. Always will be." "Then let me be a fool." The sheriff glared but turned his horse, muttering as he rode off. Eliza had watched from the window, her hands trembling against the frame. When Luke came back in, she couldn't meet his eyes. "They're right," she whispered. "I'm trouble." He shook his head. "You're human. They'll say I've trapped you." "Then let 'em talk." His tone was calm, final. She bit her lip, shame and gratitude wrestling inside her. "You shouldn't have to fight for me." He looked at her then, really looked, and said quietly, "I ain't fighting for you. I'm fighting against a world that forgot kindness." That night, neither of them spoke much. The storm had passed, but another kind of quiet hung between them. Tender, fragile, waiting. Later, when Luke went outside to check the horses, Eliza found his coat by the door, the sleeve torn from some old repair left undone. She took needle and thread from her bundle and began to mend it. Her stitches were uneven, but she worked carefully, whispering small prayers with every pass of the needle. When he returned, he found the coat folded neatly by his chair. "You didn't have to," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "I know." He ran his fingers along the mended seam, the rough thread glowing orange in the firelight. For the first time, she saw him smile, a small, honest curve that warmed the entire room. The narrator's voice, quiet as memory, rose like wind across old wood. "Kindness is how 2 broken souls remember what love was supposed to mean." They sat together long after the fire sank into coals. Outside, the moon climbed silver through the branches, casting its light across the half-finished cradle by the wall. Eliza watched it, then whispered, "When the snow clears, I'll have to go." Luke didn't answer. He only stared into the flames, his jaw working as though shaping words he wasn't ready to speak. When he finally did, his voice was low. "Maybe. But the storm ain't over yet." And with those few words, something fragile but alive stirred between them. Neither promise nor plea, but the quiet beginning of belonging. The wind returned before dawn, howling through the chimney like a beast denied entry. Luke woke first, sensing the shift in the air before the storm broke. Snow hammered against the cabin walls, a relentless rhythm of nature reclaiming what it owned. He rose quietly, threw logs on the fire, and checked the latch on the door. But when he turned, he saw Eliza sitting upright on the bed, one hand gripping her belly, her face pale as the drifts outside. "It's early," he said, voice low, already knowing it wasn't. She tried to speak, but the pain bent her forward. A cry escaped her, small but sharp. "It's happening," she whispered, fear slicing through her words. "It's too soon." Luke crossed the room in 2 strides. "How long?" Since midnight," she gasped. "I thought it would stop, but it—" Her breath hitched, she pressed her forehead against her knees. He knelt beside her, steadying her shoulders. The firelight carved their faces into trembling sculpture, her tears shining, his jaw set like iron. "You're gonna be all right," he said, though his voice shook. "I'll get water. You stay with me, Eliza. You hear?" Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, time fractured into fragments of sound. The crackle of fire, the thunder of her heart, his boots against the floor. Luke filled the kettle, set it on the flame, grabbed cloths, blankets, anything. His hands moved fast, clumsy but determined. Another cry tore from her throat. "Luke, I can't." "Yes, you can." He gripped her hand. "You're stronger than you think." She looked at him, eyes wide and wet. "You don't have to do this." "I do," he said, voice rough with something deeper than duty. "You ain't alone." He wiped sweat from her brow as she labored. The hours stretched like wire. The storm battered the cabin, shaking it to its bones, but inside, something fierce and human fought back. Every time she faltered, his voice steadied her. Every time she screamed, he whispered her name like a prayer. When the kettle whistled, he poured hot water into a bowl, his hands shaking only after she couldn't see them. He had fought blizzards and buried his wife without tears, but this fight for life, made him tremble. The room filled with heat and struggle. Her breath came ragged, her knuckles white as she clung to him. "It hurts," she sobbed. "It hurts so much." "I know," he murmured, brushing damp hair from her face. "I know. But you keep going, Eliza. Don't stop now." The fire dimmed, shadows lengthening. For a moment, the world narrowed to her pain and his hands, one holding hers, the other catching the first cries of a new life. A wail split the cabin, raw and miraculous. The storm seemed to pause, the wind softening as if to listen. Luke let out a shuddered breath. The baby, a tiny perfect girl, squirmed in his arms, her skin flushed against the flicker of firelight. He wrapped her in a blanket and placed her on Eliza's chest. Eliza looked down, disbelief dissolving into wonder. Her fingers traced the baby's cheek, trembling. She's beautiful." "She is," Luke said softly. Eliza wept, silent tears spilling across her skin. "I thought I'd die out there," she whispered. "I thought God forgot me." He crouched beside her, eyes steady. He didn't. The baby's small cry rose again, thin and strong. Luke smiled faintly. "Sounds like she's got your will." Eliza looked up at him, the weight of everything between them filling the air. The snow, the silence, the long road that led her here. "Luke," she said softly, "I can't stay." He frowned. "You ain't leaving in this weather." "I mean, after." Her voice broke. "They'll say I trapped you. A man like you doesn't need a woman like me." His expression darkened, but his tone stayed even. "A man like me?" She met his gaze, desperate. "I'm ruined, Luke. You know that." He stared at her for a long time. Outside, the snow beat harder against the roof. You think shame's heavier than a storm? He asked quietly. It passes, Eliza. All of it does. Her breath hitched. But why? Why do you care? He leaned closer, his face half in shadow. Because I know what it feels like to lose everything that makes you human. The wind howled, shaking the shutters. He stood, went to the window, and looked out over the white horizon. When my wife died, he said, I thought I was done. But the land didn't stop needing me. The horses didn't stop eating. Life don't wait for grief to finish. It keeps going. And now, he turned toward her, his eyes raw. So do I. Eliza's throat closed. Luke, Rest, he interrupted gently. Talk later. She nodded weakly, cradling the baby. Her eyes fluttered shut. Luke sat by her side, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the faint curl of the baby's fingers around her mother's shawl. The storm began to ease at last, the sound fading to a whisper. When Eliza woke hours later, dawn had broken. The light spilling through the window was pale and golden. She blinked, confusion fading into calm. The baby slept beside her, warm and safe. Luke was by the fire, shirtless still, mending a chair leg as though nothing extraordinary had happened. You stayed, she said. He looked up. Course I did. Her gaze softened. You could have left. No one would have blamed you. He set the chair aside, stood, and walked to her. His expression held no grand emotion, only quiet certainty. You're mine now, he said simply. The words were not ownership but vow. Her breath caught, the weight of them sinking deep. He went to the door and opened it. The storm had ended. The world outside was blinding white, sun glinting off the snow like silver fire. In the distance, faint figures approached, riders from town, gossip and judgment riding with them. Luke turned back to her, calm as ever. They'll come lookin'. Let 'em. Her heart pounded. What will you say? He smiled faintly, and the sunlight caught in his hair. Truth's simple enough. When the riders arrived, he met them outside. The sheriff dismounted first, scowling. You've gone too far this time, Carver. Folks say you're keepin' that woman. Luke's voice carried steady through the cold. She's under my roof and under my name. That's all anyone needs to know. Inside, Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely. The sound of his words, the way they wrapped around her like a shield, broke something open in her. The men muttered, unsettled. None dared challenge him. One by one, they turned and rode away. When he came back inside, she whispered, Why did you say that? He met her eyes. Because it's true. He took the baby from her arms, gentle as sunlight. Eliza Carver, he murmured, testing the name like a prayer. Has a good sound to it. Her tears came faster now. Silent, unguarded, full of relief and disbelief. Luke looked down at the child, whose tiny hand grasped his finger. She'll grow up knowin' what it means to be wanted, he said softly. The narrator's voice, distant and reverent, closed like a hymn. In a world quick to name shame, he gave her another name, one born not from pity, but from mercy. And under that name, the storm finally rested. Outside, the snow began to melt beneath the newborn sun. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth enough to last a lifetime.